I was wondering where to go with today's message. Seeing Maxime Bernier's face and the logo of the People's Party of Canada, along with the word vote and say no to mass immigration. Now, whether it was authorized or not, it doesn't make much difference. I mean, it's a symptom of a deeper and disturbing part of our lives, of a conversation that is necessary, but a conversation that's so difficult in terms of how we look at immigration, how we look at newcomers, how we look at those who are different from us. And it's not surprising that this conversation is happening in Canada. I mean, we just look at our sisters and brothers in the States. Their reimagining of the iconic poem on the Statue of Liberty, whose words by Emma Lazarus call out, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." And that's been associated for over 2 centuries with the United States being a haven, a beckoning for those places and people in the world who are in need. And yet, recent government reform is attempting to bring strict new measures that could dramatically change the legal immigration system. And as I was thinking about today's message, I was also taken by Michael Adler's sketchbook in the paper yesterday. Did anyone notice it? I can't show it on the screen because as soon as I do, we get copyright infringement and everything else, so I'm not going to bother. I have asked the paper before whether we can do it, and you could for a significant price, but 2 of them that caught my attention. And as we talk about the what's going on in Britain and the rising anxiety as they talk about Brexit, but the second one is the Queen with Boris Johnson just about to go over the falls in the boat that's called No Deal Brexit. And the caption is, "Hold on to your knickers. Not even democracy can stop me now." And then the last caption is folks seated around a table, the G7 leaders. And off in the corner is Donald Trump throwing paper towels. Why is he throwing paper towels at us? Angela Merkel comments. And as we wake up this morning, we wonder about the severe effects of this weather that's going on around the world, whether it's the burning of the Amazon rainforest or simply the hurricanes, as we're in the midst of hurricane season. This seemingly small storm that started out last week has become a monster Category 5 storm, Dorian, as it heads towards the Bahamas and the East Coast. I was reminded, as I was thinking about all of these things, I was reminded of the context of the book of Hebrews. And I'd read a while ago in the introduction to a commentary by Thomas Long, sort of just the context of the community and what he had put together about it. And that's when I talked a little bit about the poem as well from Isaiah that you had brought back the videotape from. And I just want to share his introduction to the book and see if this matches anything that's going on with us. The preacher is not preaching into a vacuum. He is addressing a real and urgent pastoral problem, one that seems astonishingly contemporary. His congregation is exhausted. They are tired of serving the world, tired of worship, tired of Christian education, tired of being peculiar and whispered about in society, tired of the spiritual struggle, tired of trying to keep their prayer life going, tired even of Jesus, because it doesn't seem to be making a lot of difference. That's my addition. Their hands droop and their knees are weak. Attendance is down at church and they're losing confidence. The threat to the congregation is not that they are charging off in the wrong direction. They do not have enough energy to charge off anywhere. The threat here is that, worn down and worn out, they will drop their end of the rope and drift away. Tired of walking the walk, many of them are considering taking a walk, leaving the community and falling away from the faith. And that's the context of Hebrews. And as the preacher tries to persuade, tries to find a way to bring them home. Jill Duffield talks about Hebrews 13, the portion of it that we read, as a possibility of just simply calling it Discipleship 101. Discipleship 101. She says, in this section we have rubber meets the road instructions to the early Christians and to us. Let mutual love continue. So they're loving, but how are they being sanctified? How are they living out and responding to that gift of love? Extend hospitality to strangers. Well, this is not new. This is part of their religious heritage that has been going on, whether they were Jewish or Gentile. Living in a nomadic society around that region, they would have known the meaning and the necessity of hospitality to the stranger. It's not a surprise. And immediately we should begin to think about the three strangers that visit Abraham and Sarah, and they're welcomed to that wonderful meal. And they're bringing that great news about the soon-to-be-born son to this old couple. I mean, Lot strongly urges two angels to stay. When they do, he makes a feast for them. Gideon has an angelic encounter, as does Samson's mother. Just to name a few in the Old Testament. And then there's that very, very famous encounter, Mary's unexpected annunciation. And sometimes it leads to a dinner party with heavenly guests. You never know when and where this might happen. So, when have you encountered angels unawares? Lanny Peters loves to tell this story. He says, some years ago I was traveling alone and I passed a hitchhiker. My first impulse is to pass by, but that day there was something in his face. This old man with his thumb out made me pause. Perhaps it was his snaggle-toothed grin, or the way he happily waved as I passed. In any case, I found myself hitting the brakes and pulling over, and I watched in the rearview mirror as he moved toward the car hurriedly, despite a prominent limp. In a moment, he crawled in the seat beside me, shook my hand, and said exuberantly, "Oh, thank you for the ride, young man. My name's Henry." Henry was quite a talker. Or perhaps he had just not had a chance to talk to anyone in a while. He ended up telling me a lot of his life story and was interested in mine as well, and not hesitating to ask questions that many might consider too personal from a stranger. He'd retired, did not own a car, and one of his children was in hospital several hundred miles away, and he was going to make a visit. I told him I was going only about halfway before I would turn and go in another direction. And at one point, he began talking about a place he'd like to eat near where I would leave him. Thinking he was going to ask for money, I was considering how much to give him, and when he pulled out one of the most ragged billfolds I'd ever seen. He searched through it and said, "I think I've got enough here and would like to buy us both supper." I laughed and said, No, I can buy my own supper. In fact, I can buy yours if you like." "Nope. You've done enough already in giving me this ride this far." We ate a great little meal at the roadside diner where the waitress knew his name. And I left him there and continued to continue his journey and my own journey. Fits with what we're doing at Spirit Cafe. Destination or the journey. Later, Lanny comments, "I really suspected that I had entertained one of God's angels unawares." The preacher of Hebrews calls us to mutual love. But he expands that, or defines that, by saying it is to those that are also outside of what we consider our normal flock. Remember those who are in prison, as if you were in prison with them. And if you're not clear on the point, he goes to the next point. And remember those who are tortured as if you are being tortured, too. James Cone, in his book, "In the Cross and the Lynching Trees," begins his concluding chapter with this very verse from Hebrews. And Cone argues that white Christians fail to remember those being tortured and lynched as if they themselves were being tortured and lynched. He writes about white theologians and lay people alike failing to connect the crucified Jesus with the enslavement, segregation, and lynching of black people. He says it takes a lot of theological blindness to do that, especially since the vigilantes were white Christians who claimed to worship the Jew lynched in Jerusalem. And that's why Give Me Jesus gave me such pause to think about that woman. Give me Jesus. As we consider this text, a question might be, how are we doing as Christians? Do we still fail to act not only as sisters and brothers, but as a unified, invisible body, heartbroken and hurting when one part suffers and therefore relentlessly seeking justice for the whole? Do we feel that pain and that heartbreak? So I think we need to. The list of expectations that the preacher goes through, they continue from sort of outside towards the inner community, the immediate household. Honor marriage. Do not love money. And even the most intimate details of our lives are bound to the rule of love and to the reign of Jesus. But the hopeful word that comes in the wake of all these warnings and admonitions is the promise of Christ's never-failing presence and help. There's no reason to be afraid. Christ is here. The crucified Savior, the one whose heart breaks, is here. He's with us. And then there's that really interesting piece about remembering your leaders. Well, for Hebrews, it was part of, as a community was struggling, was sort of remembering those who had taught the faith and had mentors in the faith, and that will help as you reach out into these particular cases. As you work on hospitality and prison visits and advocacy works and generosity and more. Remembering the leaders is one way of connecting and helping in that relationship and to build it. But it has a very different meaning when you consider that an election is coming. Remember your leaders. When we take out the sense of remember the leaders in your own, well, they are in our community. They're part of this larger family, this larger human family. And in the Canadian context and in this region, why not remember them? Why not hold them to accountability as we hold ourselves to accountability? The reading ends with a call to continual worship and to ongoing good works. But let's make sure that we are very clear. It is not the good works that save us. It's how we are sanctified. We are already saved. Jesus has done that through his death, through his life, death, and resurrection. He has set us free. It is that wonderful gift of grace. But we still need to be defined by it. Our response to give me Jesus needs to be how we live, how we show mutual love, hospitality, faithfulness, contentment, humility to remember our leaders and to learn from them and to remind them. These things are, as Dunfield maybe suggested, discipleship 101. They're simple, but they're far from easy. But the good news today is that Jesus prays for us and with us. The Spirit intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words. And the community, the wider community, holds us all accountable and stands with us in our suffering and in our joys. Thanks be to God. Amen.